Today, everyone, we have Teresa and Fowler. They are an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education and instructor in gender and sexuality studies at the University of Calgary. Her research focuses on the cultural reproduction of masculinity in elite men's ice hockey and how unhealthy masculinity continues to reproduce not only in ice hockey and sport, but in kindergarten to grade 12 and higher education. Oh, talk to us, Teresa. Thank you for being here.
No, thanks for having me.
How did you, I just have to ask this selfishly, I zero in on ice hockey specifically and sport.
Yeah, so I mean, zeroing in on that just kind of came about when you're trying to do research and looking for research participants. And I happened to stumble upon a U18 AAA team. And then it got to the point where else can you research this demographic but in elite men's ice hockey? Because that's where all of our cis, straight, hetero men are. So for me, men's ice hockey becomes like the petri dish, right? Of this issue where you can see where everything is like super elevated. Masculinity is like on dial 10, right? So for me,
Yeah.
that's where I can, look at how this culture continues to reproduce. But then what can we learn from that, right? What can we learn from that? Because in our classrooms, and that's why I was late, I was working on a presentation for teacher convention, because teachers are feeling this, obviously your listeners are, that boys are just, we just don't know what to do with boys. But I think the big thing is boys don't know what to do with boys.
Teresa, did you have access to all of those players on that U18 AAA team for research?
I did. Not all of them participated. There was
Okay.
only, I think, about 5 that actually participated in that study. But I have since then worked with colleagues where we interviewed 21 professional and semi-professional elite men's ice hockey players. And I also worked with the university men's ice hockey team.
I just, so, okay. So clearly, is there a problem in the way how big of a problem is this in our worlds as moms with kids in sport, boys in sport specifically?
For sure. I mean, I think sport, we know, is a site of where children learn what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine. And that's from both sides, girls and boys sides. Like when I'm doing a project right now with a soccer club in Edmonton, and we can see the sexism just like oozing. But the thing is that boys and men just, they have no clue they're being sexist. Do you know what I mean? Like, despite Me Too, despite all of the narratives of things changing, boys just don't recognize those moments when they're being sexist because they're inundated with it, right? There are no, according to the Boyhood Report Card, there are no TV shows for boys that have lead characters with LGBTQ spectrum, right?
It's a new one, right? There's a book series out right now, and I don't know if it's from a TV show. You know the one I'm talking about? It's a graphic novel series. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is really popular, which I'm glad to see.
Yeah, it's starting, right? And that's the thing, is boys don't have a language for what it means to be a boy post Me Too, right? Like it's no longer okay for boys to, constantly barrage their female colleagues in classes with sexist comments. But it's also not okay for educators to, engage in gender bias, because educators, we also are guilty of it. You get the boys to move the heavy tables rather than asking for who wants to move the heavy tables. When cosmetology classes, when boys are putting nail polish on their fingers, who cares? Like don't shame them. And in Alberta, for a long period of time, you didn't need to get a high school diploma to get a job in the oil field. That has changed. But part of that narrative impacted boys in school when they end up in the discipline cycle, because most of the principals in high schools are male. And so the man up phrase happens. go get a
Mm.
job, go figure it out. And so that's how it continues to reproduce.
So it is people in the community, it's the leaders, the coaches, the teachers, the it's all of these people who are continuing a gender bias or a negative perception against women. Like, where is this problem manifesting in terms of, like, what is this behavior looking like in real life, in specifically hockey too, because that's where you did your study. But what is the narratives and the toxicism, of that word? Where is
Toxic.
that toxic? Yeah, what is that looking like for us as moms?
Well, if you know, keeping it in the hockey field, what it looks like, I mean, we've seen the implications of the
Mm-hmm.
extreme with the World Junior team finally being charged, and that's part of the problem too. Is there's a lack of accountability, especially in men's elite ice hockey. And if you're a parent of young boys specifically who are in hockey, you might notice that they get adultified, right? You know, like we tend to look at them as their potential rather than the
Mm-hmm.
fact that they're boys. You know, I remember when I worked at a
So
high
funny.
school once, we had a player who ended up going to play for Chicago. And every time he would come into the school as a bantam player, people would bring like things to autograph. And it's like, dude,
Mm-hmm.
he's just a kid, you know, to just
Mm-hmm.
let him figure it out. But how we see it is we see, you know, it's kind of guised under this idea of tradition, right? You hear that a lot in hockey, the tradition. That's the way things are. And unfortunately, the way
Yes.
things are has been to objectify women and girls. And because the locker rooms often, especially, you know, as you get higher up, they become that sanctified space where parents aren't invited.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Coaches aren't allowed anymore either. No,
I
it's
know.
now just the kids.
Exactly. And I had an email actually from a coach in BC who said that's been their practice is to give the dressing room to the kids. But now he's reflecting and recognizing that that's not the place we need to, because that's where pictures are shared. Men in our study said, like literally said, they share pictures their girlfriends send to them because it's a way of team bonding,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not meaning any harm. And that's the thing, they don't understand, right? They don't see the implications of that intimate moment between you and your partner is now opened up to your team. And why are women being used to incite performance, right? So those spaces need to be opened up. They need to have adults in the room and not just coaches, because we've seen in our data where coaches have been in the room
Mm-hmm.
where there's been things that should not have happened. Like, for example, a coach told, I think it was, I want to say it was might have been younger than Bantam, but they had just lost. And he told,
Bantam is like 12 or 13. What's
so then, yeah, it was Bantam. It was Bantam. He told the
I
teams
don't know.
that
I don't know how old that is. I don't know how old Bantam is. Is it like 13 or like
it was I mean, regardless, they were young. He told the
okay.
players that I'm going to go hang myself in my shower because you guys lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like just the language and this constant pressure to win, right? You know, as parents, did you put your kids in hockey to win?
Mm-mm.
You know what I mean? Or did you put them in to make friends, to be active? And I think somewhere along the way, that's where winning kind of takes over what the goal is in sport, right? The goal in sport is to build collaborative skills, to build relationships, not to objectify women, not to effeminate young boys. I mean, it's statistically impossible. There are no openly gay, other than Luke Procat, openly gay players in the NHL. Like, it's
Shit.
impossible. Um, but we know that until sexism and homophobia are eradicated from sport, we're not going to see more gay men open, right?
So let's just say we have four boys and they're all in hockey. They want to be there. They all have dreams to do better, to go places, right? I think every kid has a dream. How are we supporting their dreams while keeping them accountable for being people who are well well raised in an environment where they are advocates for not being that way. And I just said we just had a podcast where I said, those 5 boys who are charged in this assault, all 5 of them didn't stop to think this is not a good idea. Like out of all, I'm assuming all 5 of them don't come from parents that sit there and degrade women, and some of them might even had sisters and girlfriend. Like, right? What's going wrong that in their head this is acceptable behavior? If the accused, I'm not saying they're guilty because that's a whole nother bag of things, but that one of them didn't stand up that we know of and say, hey, are you okay? Like, can I call you an Uber? This isn't right. There's 5 of us and 1 of her.
Yeah.
How are we teaching this? And how I never want to assume that my child would make the right decision because I don't know that till they're there. But is there a thing we can do to teach them your coach is unacceptable, but you're playing for him and you got to listen to him, but only half of it. Like, what are we doing? How
Yeah,
without punishing them for, wanting what they want.
For sure. I mean, but you have to ask ourselves again, does their dream include being involved in a gang rape? Do you know what I mean? Does their
Totally.
dream, it doesn't. So it's that's where the culture kind of steps in and says, if you want to be successful and reach your dream, you must do this. And as parents, how many times I remember us, when our son was playing, there's this fear that if I speak up, my son's going to be benched, right? So it's this culture of fear that coaches really hang over the heads of parents and kids. But then coaches have to ask themselves what's hanging over their heads. If, for example, they're in a paid position, are they being rewarded for the number of wins, or are they being rewarded for having a good team culture? So it's really kind of asking those questions, is there integrity in what I'm doing right now? And if there isn't, then it's time to shift. And you know what I mean?
And it takes the top players. There's a power shift, and it takes the top players. I'm not playing for that team because that coach is toxic, or as whatever. And that's the shift that's got to happen, because the minute you have the top players and families say absolutely not, the minute the power goes down and we start to value coaches who are fostering support and health. And my son has 2 females who play on his team, and I absolutely wish they would stay on. I wish females would stay longer because it helps have a dialogue around what you can model, and they can be around and have conversations.
And it doesn't even need to be like the girl players, but like a female on the bench or a part, like as a leader.
Manager.
Even our managers don't have any
interaction
with the kids, but to have somebody like that. And like you said, and what you're saying is you need people to stand up. People are too afraid to stand up because they don't want to be benched, and they don't want to, there's coaches that will literally fire families because mom speaks up too much, so you're off the team. And I don't feel like we're close at all for people to be standing up and doing what we all know needs to happen to change this.
And that's the part that I think we underestimate. You know what I mean? Like, I think the more we recognize that this culture is unhealthy, then maybe folks will stand up. One of the activities I do with men, boys, is the Mask of Masculinity. And I don't know if you've seen the movie The Mask You Live In, but I would highly recommend it. And one of the activities they do in that movie is they have men on one side of the mask draw sort of how society sees them. And on the other side of the mask, you draw how you're feeling. And when I did this activity with the university hockey team, I didn't ask them to share. Like, we were in a focus group. And it speaks to your point, the importance of captains, the importance of leaders. So the captain said, hey, let's all read our masks. And so then it turned into they were all reading what was on the outside and inside. But as they were reading the inside, it was this collective feelings of vulnerability, these collective feelings of fear, of not being able to speak. And then when they recognize, hey, we're all feeling like this is not cool. What are we going to do about it? Right. And so I think if we recognize that men and boys in these elite high performance sports that have this expectation of this particular brand of masculinity are suffering, and it makes sense then why we see the behaviors, right? It's like in school, when a boy can't understand what's happening, what do? They act out, right? And so that's why we see these behaviors, is because men are in pain, men are suffering, but they're not given the latitude to cry, to have emotions, or do you know what I mean? And so they do what's expected, like the path of least resistance.
Well, they do what they've been taught or watched. Exactly. They do what they have spent the most time doing, right? As they do what's familiar, because that's what they watched growing up when they're at the rink more than they are in your house. And, it's rewarded, as we've said before. It's like, oh, that guy gets this because and then they're kind of, like you said, a commodity. And then if they're sort of done with, and you've used them, and now they're just this empty shell who was something at the age of 12 and is now really not what he was at 8. So let's get rid of him.
Teresa, as parents, we're sitting here and it seems kind of scary, because what I feel like we're saying is, like, we're so far, like right now, we know so many things. We're just talking about it. But as parents who have lots of kids in hockey or in any sport, what can we do to help change this?
Well, I mean, it starts with having conversations with your kids, right? Like, tell your kid this idea of the culture of silence doesn't exist and it's caused harm. So it's okay to tell me, your parents, what's happening in the dressing room, what your coach is saying, and just have conversations with them, and unpack some of those things. Like, if you see something on the ice, for example, say, hey, well, what happened there? Like, why did Johnny go and twack, Johnny too? What was happening there? Oh, it's because the code. Well, what do you mean by the code? You know what I mean? Like, have those conversations with them. I remember when we would drive our son home from baseball practice and he would listen to rap music, and I would like pause it. Well, what do they mean by that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because boys don't have the opportunity to dialogue, and that's the biggest thing. So as parents, it's have a dialogue with your child, and don't be shocked. You know what I mean? Like, don't dismiss them. You need to have that, oh, he said that, and then get upset later because you don't want to shut your kid down by having oh my god. But I think it's just having a dialogue with our children, and that's the nice thing about social media. Social media is holding things accountable that would not have happened otherwise, right? Like, when you see hockey fights or you see things like that, we are now able to sort of unpack them a little bit more. And so it's just really, as a parent, just talking to your kiddos, what's happening in their lives, and letting them know that some of these things are not okay.
Can you say something like, I did this, so I will take full responsibility. But I said to my son, this is what's happening in Hockey Canada, and there's 5 boys who are charged with sexual assault. And I hope that if you are one of those boys in a room where there's 5 boys and one female, you ask her if she's okay, and you make sure she gets in an Uber home. You're not one who thinks it's funny that, is that too harsh? To kind of be like, I hope you are that one. Like, can we actually just call it out and say, don't do that?
Yes, exactly. And I think the more concrete and clear the examples is helpful, because we have to remember, look at brain development in young boys. Their brains are mush. They have no idea what's going on. So the more concrete examples we have for them, the better, because that's the thing. You also have to think about, these are young athletes. And how do athletes learn, right? They learn by having X's and O's on a board and telling them what to do. And so if you don't have those concrete examples,
critical thinking,
right? Exactly. If you don't have those concrete examples for our young athletes, that's how it keeps going. And so that's why we need dialogue. We need to unpack those things. And yes, absolutely, give them a concrete example, because it needs to be a clear as day for our young
You
boys.
just like, I had the biggest light bulb moment because they are told what to do and they're rewarded for doing. And you like, they don't get to sit and be like, I don't agree with that, because then they're yelled, they're told not to think.
Exactly.
But I have to ask you, at those, let's just say, for example, those 5 boys, did one of them at one point think, maybe not, like, do they lose in this pack mentality? Are they raised to just think, nah, this is fine? Like, they've got to have some type of thinking, no? Like, do they
hope, right? You would hope. And, I mean, what happened in that room, we'll certainly learn more about as things transpire. But, you would hope that there is that little spark of decency inside every human. But again, it's the pressure of the culture. It's the pressure of winning at all costs, especially in men's elite ice hockey, that kind of take over. And that's why, we need to
invincibility. There's nothing that you can't touch me because I'm the best in the, I am chosen. I'm so good. Nothing really applies to me.
Exactly. Because these folks haven't had to open doors, right? You know what I mean? People open doors for them. And now it's unfortunate it took the London police so long to make charges in this case, right? But that speaks to the cultural symbols that these folks have. If they're deemed as untouchable by the police force, it makes sense that women won't come forward when they have these, because there's a lot of shame. But I think it's important for women who have experienced sexual harassment and abuse to know that they do need to come forward, and that there are folks out there. We believe in survivors. We support survivors. But this culture needs to be broken open by having dialogue with boys and men.
I have to ask this question because I do have 3 boys and they play hockey, and one of them is of the age of hitting, and the other ones will be. It's not the hitting so much, but I'm just curious because you've worked with like these male athletes. The idea of when they fight. Do we just need to like let that go as like that's part of the entertainment? Like I know, but like because that's when everybody's like, oh my god, there's a fight, and everyone goes and look. I even remember
and gets excited.
This evening the hockey game was on, and one of the kids went like this to you. Look, there's a fight.
Yeah,
and so
it was my daughter.
I know, but it's also saying like, I mean, they're so aggressive, and it's so it looks so barbaric, and like there's no other place that it's okay,
and it's encouraged,
and it's
like,
also
it's actually what they want.
And they say like there's people hired to be on the team to be that thing. How do we explain to kids that like it's okay there because they actually have to do it, I guess in the NHL, but it's not acceptable off the ice, and it's not acceptable. Like it's a very confusing thing to explain.
For sure. And I mean, fighting in hockey is the first thing that I have strongly advocated needs to go. Physical contact happens. Absolutely. You've got grown ass men, on knives with no friction. It's going to happen. It's the intentional physical violence that needs to be gone from hockey. And actually, Quebec Major Junior League got rid of fighting in hockey a few years ago. And you have to ask yourself, why are there concussion protocols in this sport if we're encouraging hitting and fighting? It makes absolutely no sense. And, and it also takes away from the beauty of the game, the skill, the athleticism.
It makes them look like idiots.
Absolutely. And you're right. Despite, the narrative that's being propagated that these folks are not on the teams, they are on the teams, and they still get tapped shoulders to go out and do these things. And that causes a lot of anxiety. For example, in our study, someone said, he knew this team that they were playing, his job was to set the tone. And so on his way to the game to deal with it, he drank, right? Like he was drunk and went out, got it done. Okay, I'm good. Now I can chill out, right? And others describe, the fear about having to go on the ice knowing that they're going to have to fight. So
that makes me feel nervous.
And that's the thing. And what's wrong with us not fighting and saying to the coach, hey, like we maybe as parents don't want to have this narrative, you know. And I mean, you know, just because the NHL does it doesn't mean it's right. Do you know what I mean? And
Yep.
and you can see the difference when there are folks that are just really focusing on the skill and trying to stay
yeah.
it, right, rather than getting in. But the problem is that if, you know, referees and officiating don't like say, okay, boom, you're done, you're out, you know, it keeps happening. Like in university sports, you're not supposed to fight, right? And when
but do they
do, and when it happens, they get suspended, so they're gone. So
Okay.
it's not as
That's better. Yeah. I just saw this, just to go like against everything that we are talking about and what we believe to be the way things need to go. I don't know if you guys saw, but there was a like a 6'7" rookie whose first game in the NHL, when they did the face-off, the other player said, "Let's go," and he started his career off right with an immediate before the game started. They fought, and they're like, "That's the way to start your NHL career." That was his first game, first face-off. They beat each other up, and everyone was like,
recently?
It was like this past weekend.
Yeah, and the commentary, Jennifer Butterell, she is brilliant because she said that point that you just said, and that moment was left over from a previous fight that put Connor Bedard out, right? So we have all of these lingering moments of violence, and even at
violence,
right? The Ottawa Senators the other night, I can't remember who they were playing, but he took a shot in the empty net, which violated the code, right? And then that result,
a slap shot,
right? And so, but this code, these traditions, these underlying things that are supposed to make the game what? Do you know what I mean? Like
more entertaining for people, like more barbaric, more, you know, like more.
We have
like
so far to go. We have so far to go, Teresa.
As moms, I mean, I know, and as parents, I know you said, like, you know, listen, it's not just even hockey, it's locker rooms. It is a place where men gather, right? Like we've heard of places where it's happened within an environment where it's boys in a pack, right? Like starting as like a play fight, turning into a massive fight. Like this whole testosterone. I don't want to blame testosterone because that's not something that we can just put, you know, hormones on something separate. When they're in a pack, how do you get them to check? Or is it the constant conversations? Because I want to make really clear here that this is not just for people playing hockey, that your kid in a pack, because pack is a real thing, this pack mentality. How do you stand out or say, hey, I'm out, or I'm not doing this? And what is that we can instill or teach? Or is it role modeling? Or is it the conversation? What is that we can do? And from what age do we start?
Well, I mean, the sooner we start, the better, right? You know, and you're right. Pack mentality is not just something exclusive to boys. You know, our classes at our university are in the cohort model, so we see the same thing. You know, when that's happening, right? But I think it's just recognizing, you know, for young boys especially, you know, to really ensure that they have confidence to speak up in those moments, that they know that, you know what, the sun's still going to rise tomorrow. If I'm not in this peer group, I can find another peer group that meets my needs. And it really comes down to ensuring our children are confident and have sort of the ability to express themselves, that they're in a safe space. And as parents, it's just asking those questions and noticing behaviors. You know, if you notice your kids starting to do something different, you know, is there something you're picking up that we didn't lay down as a family? And where did you get that from? And we need to have a conversation about the ways in which you're describing young women, for example. That's not really sitting well with me. And again, they just don't know, because no one's talking about things with boys. So again, it's just, you know, just noticing and asking. And, you know, the best place I found, you know, because we raised 4 boys, and the best place I found to have conversation with our boys was when you're driving.
Yeah.
You know, and you know this, right? Because you're both looking this way. You're not looking at each other, and they can't escape, right? So there's no, you know, unless you jump out the door when you're trying to have a conversation. But you know what I mean? It's just ensuring that boys have a voice and that we hear what they're saying, and we kind of have to peel back those layers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. And I think there's a lot of examples where we can point out where that's why I love females in the mix with males in the testosterone filled areas. And once one of my children came home and was singing a song, and it was like they were all naming body parts, like A begins with, right? And he was singing a song, and I'm like, where'd you learn that? Like, I was like, what? And he said where he had learned it, and it was in a locker room. And I said, think about how the females in that locker room would feel as you got to the word T and didn't say tibula, not him, but as someone else in the locker room said it. And then they're like, it's just a song. I'm like, it's not just a song, you know? And I think it's those little moments where and not to get them in trouble, but to just point out, how do you think they would feel if you were in a room full of girls and they got to D and decided not to say, I don't even know their D word, if that would be a body part, but you know what they would say. Yeah. How would that feel? It's uncomfortable when you're the only gender, right? So it's, I'm assuming it's pulling out things you see on TV, because they might not always tell you a story, things you see online, and things that they might story tell about what happened at school and why, you know, giat isn't okay to say to your teacher or to another female as they walk by, you know, nice giat, like things like that, which is funny, but we have to kind of stop the language early.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important, to your point, that there is a woman, or like, we're just talking about gender and sexuality, that it is important to have a female in the space, right? Because we noticed that in our data. There was, you know, when we interviewed the professional men's ice hockey players, there was 3 of us on the research team, two women and 1 man. And when we looked at the transcripts, my male colleague got the bravado in the transcripts, you know, like the pump in the chest, whereas myself and my female colleague, we got the more, you know, emotional responses, and the more, you know, sort of thinking about, oh, I was being sexist when I said that. Right? Because when they're in the man-on-man interview, there's no one on the outside to say, oh, ooh, you might not want to have thought that. You know what I mean? And so it speaks to the importance of having different bodies in these spaces, because without them, like you said, you know, there isn't someone to catch them to say, hey, that's not cool, right?
You said that movie, did you say it's called The Face Behind the Mask?
The Mask You Live In.
The Mask You Live In. Is that appropriate for kids?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay. I watched it. We watched it with all of our boys, you know, more so when they were teenagers. But and when I talked to them about it, it was funny. The one part that they thought they didn't agree with was video games, the influence of video games on this conversation, because video games are also quite sexist, right? And so look at all the influences, and that's what this movie does so well, is it puts in perspective how young boys or men are inundated with these notions of masculinity, and it comes from everywhere. It's like there isn't a safe space for boys to just be boys. And that's why you know, in schools, there was a study done in 2014 out in British Columbia that looked at the impact of gay-straight alliances in schools. And one of the outcomes they found, especially in a school that had strong anti-homophobic policies for 3 years, that suicide rates and suicidal ideations for heterosexual boys dropped by 70%.
Wow. Just by having having.
Absolutely. Because having a GSA in a school tells us that there's more than one way to be a boy, more than one way to be a girl, right? There's a spectrum, that I don't have to adhere to this particular brand that I've been, you know, drinking all of my life.
So even if they're not part of that group, it just as a heterosexual man, knowing that they have options to be a certain way. Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Drop the mic.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
Where can parents go? What should they do? And, you know, what's next for all of us as we navigate, you know, this up and coming world of sports and toxicity and pack mentality of when you see a group of them, roaming the street and, they're going out with 6 of their buddies. What can we say before they walk out the door?
Right. Well, I just remember, when our kids would go out, we would always say, send me a code text. If you need an out, you need someone, you need an escape, just say, hey, I need something. And then we'll come and pick you up, and blame us, it's our fault, who knows, whatever it takes to kind of get out of there. But I think at the end, as long as, boys feel they've got a good anchor, right? Like as long as they have a strong compass that can kind of bring them back to your own family values. But the problem is that compass shifts, right? The more they drift away into, say, the narratives like, Andrew Tate's really kind of picking up on a lot of young boys, because again, if boys aren't feeling that their compass aligns, they're going to find something to align with their compass. And Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan, those folks are really kind of tapping into that narrative and giving boys that space to feel some sort of connection, right?
Wow. I mean, we have a lot of work to do. And I'm just really thankful that we had this conversation, because I feel like now we've been given permission to call it out and to actually be like, not okay. Like that is not okay. And give them a plan of what to do if they're in that position. And, cause you could end up in jail if you don't. So make sure that you do. Just thank you for that. I just thank you so much for the perspective and the conversation, and such a concrete example of such a masculine sport is really helpful to, apply. Cause I think a lot of us like to be like, well, that's not my issue. It's really nice to hear that, there is concrete examples that we can rely on.
For sure. No,
I have one question for you. What is this is like just off topic. Do you have any opinion on single sex schools?
We actually did a couple of years ago, Calgary Board of Education they have a single sex school for boys, and they wanted to do, is it better, is it not better? And really, there isn't much difference between single sex and a co-ed school, as long as the intentions, do you know what I mean, are the same. Because does the single sex school continue to reproduce gender bias? Or is it working to confront gender bias, which it has the absolute power to, I feel, right? So I mean, there isn't one or the other that's better. Again, it's just, does the culture sort of align to remove gender bias?
Okay. Thank you so much. And we will link you and everything that we've talked about. So thank you so much for your time. I feel like we just have so much work to do, people.
Yeah. Well, we can do it.
We can start with the conversations which we had today.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you.